I'm Anna, and I need some advice. My life has taken a crazy turn since moving in with my in-laws, and I'm struggling to cope with the dynamics here. I'm hoping that by sharing my story, I can get some perspective and maybe even some guidance from those who have been through similar situations. To give you some context, I've been married to my husband Mike for 5 years. We have 2 beautiful kids, Sophie, 4, and Jake, 2. Due to some difficulties with money, we decided to move in with Mike's parents temporarily until we could get back on our feet. At first, it seemed like a good idea. My mother-in-law, Linda, was very welcoming, and it felt like we were going to get the support we needed. However, my father-in-law, Richard, has been a different story. Richard is a textbook narcissist. Everything revolves around him, and he has a way of making everyone feel small and insignificant. He's always been controlling and demanding, but living under the same roof has brought out the worst in him. Before moving in, I thought I knew what to expect. Richard has always been a dominant figure, someone who needs to have the final say in everything. He thrives on control and loves to show off his accomplishments. At family gatherings, he's the one who holds court, making sure everyone knows how successful he is and how everything should be done his way. Mike had warned me about his dad's behavior, but I had no idea how intense it would be until I experienced it firsthand. Mike and I had discussed this move thoroughly and agreed it was our best option. However, now that we're here, I'm beginning to wonder if we underestimated the situation. From the moment we moved in, Richard made it clear that we were living in his house and that we needed to abide by his rules. He's retired and spends most of his time at home, which means we're constantly under his watchful eye. He criticizes everything we do, from how we parent our kids to how we manage our finances. He has no boundaries and thinks nothing of barging into our room unannounced or making derogatory comments about our parenting skills in front of Sophie and Jake. For example, he has a rigid schedule for everything. Breakfast must be at 7 a.m. sharp, lunch at noon, and dinner precisely at 6 p.m. Any deviation from this schedule is seen as a personal affront. Once, we were late for dinner because we had taken the kids to the park. We wanted them to have some fresh air and playtime, but when we returned, Richard was fuming. He lectured us about the importance of family dinners and how we were disrespecting his home by not adhering to the schedule. It's not just about the timing, it's the way he delivers these messages. He uses a tone that drips with condescension and superiority, as if we're children who need to be corrected. This is the environment we're living in, and it's taking a toll on all of us. One particular incident stands out as a turning point in our living situation. Sophie has always been a spirited child. She's curious, adventurous, and full of energy. One afternoon, she was playing with her toys in the living room when Richard stormed in, yelling at her for making too much noise. He grabbed her arm and dragged her to her room, telling her that she was being a spoiled brat and that she needed to learn some respect. I was in the kitchen at the time and heard Sophie's cries. I rushed in and confronted Richard, telling him that he had no right to treat my daughter that way. He looked at me with a cold, dismissive stare and told me that I needed to control my child and that he wouldn't tolerate any disobedience in his house. I was shaking with anger but knew that any further confrontation would only make things worse. I took Sophie in my arms and tried to comfort her, feeling utterly helpless. This incident was heartbreaking for me. Sophie didn't understand why her grandpa was so angry, and it broke my heart to see her so upset. She asked me, "Mommy, why is Grandpa mad at me?" I didn't have a good answer for her, and that made me feel like a failure as a parent. A few days later, we had a family dinner that turned into another disaster. Richard has this habit of dominating every conversation, turning every topic back to himself. That night, he was bragging about his career and how he had single-handedly built his business from the ground up. He made several passive-aggressive comments about how Mike should have followed in his footsteps instead of wasting time on his own career path. Mike, who usually tries to keep the peace, finally snapped. He told Richard that he was tired of being belittled and that he was doing his best to provide for his family. Richard's face turned red with anger, and he started yelling, calling Mike ungrateful and a failure. Linda tried to calm him down, but Richard wasn't having it. He stormed out of the dining room, slamming the door behind him. The rest of the evening was filled with awkward silence and tension. Mike and I took the kids to our room, trying to shield them from the hostility. I felt like we were prisoners in Richard's house, walking on eggshells and constantly fearing his next outburst. As if living with Richard wasn't challenging enough, family outings have become a source of stress. One weekend, we planned a day at the zoo with the kids. It was supposed to be a fun escape from the tension at home, a chance for the kids to enjoy themselves and for us to have some quality family time. However, Richard insisted on coming along. He announced it at breakfast with a smug smile, saying he wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. In reality, it felt like he wanted to keep an eye on us. The day started off fine, but soon Richard began criticizing everything. From the way we dressed the kids to the snacks we brought, nothing escaped his scrutiny. When Sophie got excited about seeing the elephants and accidentally spilled her drink, Richard berated her for being clumsy. The joy of the day quickly evaporated as we found ourselves walking on eggshells, trying to appease Richard's never-ending demands. The outing that was supposed to bring us closer as a family only highlighted the chasm that Richard's behavior was creating. As we headed back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. Linda, despite her kindness, is caught in the middle of all this. She tries to mediate, but it's clear that she's terrified of Richard. She confided in me one evening when he wasn't around, telling me how she spent years trying to appease him and keep the peace. She apologized for his behavior and said that she wishes things were different. It broke my heart to see how much she's been affected by his narcissism. Linda suggested that we try to find our own place as soon as possible, but with our current financial situation, it's easier said than done. I've started to look for work to contribute to our savings, but it feels like an uphill battle. In the meantime, we're stuck in this toxic environment and it's taken a toll on all of us. Linda's support is comforting, but it's also bittersweet. Knowing she's endured years of this treatment makes me question what kind of role model she's been forced to become for her children and grandchildren. She deserves peace and happiness, yet she seems resigned to her fate. This realization fuels my determination to break free from this cycle for the sake of my family. The final straw came when Richard started interfering with our finances. He demanded to know every detail of our spending, criticizing us for every purchase and insisting that we weren't doing enough to save money. He even went as far as to take my credit card and scrutinize the statements, pointing out what he considered to be frivolous expenses. One evening, he called a family meeting to discuss our finances. He laid out his plan for how we should be managing our money, complete with a strict budget that left no room for any personal spending. He berated Mike for not earning enough and told me that I needed to find a job immediately, regardless of the fact that I was already actively looking. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and told Richard that he had no right to control our lives and that we were doing our best. I told him that his constant criticism and interference were making things worse, not better. He exploded in anger, yelling at me and calling me ungrateful. I left the room in tears, feeling defeated and hopeless. So here I am, pouring my heart out and asking for your advice. We're in a tough spot financially and can't afford to move out just yet. I'm trying to find a job, but it's been challenging. Mike is supportive, but he's also struggling with his own issues related to his father's overbearing nature. How do we cope with living under the same roof as a narcissistic father-in-law? How can we protect our children from his toxic behavior and ensure they grow up in a loving and supportive environment? Is there any way to improve the situation, or should we focus solely on getting out as soon as possible? Despite everything, my primary concern is my children. Sophie and Jake deserve a safe and loving environment, free from the negativity that Richard brings. I'm terrified that his behavior might influence them in ways I can't foresee. Sophie, at 4, is impressionable and picks up on the tension in the house. She started asking questions about why Grandpa is always mad and why we can't just go back to our own home. Her innocent inquiries break my heart, reminding me of the urgency to shield her from this toxic atmosphere. Jake, at 2, is thankfully too young to understand what's happening. However, I fear that as he grows, he might internalize some of the aggression and criticism he witnesses. I'm determined to break this cycle and ensure my children know love, respect, and compassion. In the midst of all this chaos, I find myself reflecting on my own upbringing and what I want for my children. I grew up in a home filled with warmth and encouragement. My parents always supported me, allowing me to explore the world and make my own decisions. That's the kind of environment I want to create for Sophie and Jake. I remember my father once telling me that family should be a source of strength, not stress. Those words resonate with me now more than ever. Living with Richard has shown me what I don't want for my family, and it has strengthened my resolve to build a life that reflects the values I hold dear. Despite the challenges, I'm determined not to let this situation break me. I've started looking for work more aggressively, applying to every opportunity that comes my way. I've even taken up freelance work in the evenings, trying to build a financial cushion that will eventually allow us to leave. I've also started reaching out to friends and family for support, sharing my story and seeking advice. It's incredible how many people have experienced similar situations, and their stories of resilience inspire me to keep pushing forward. Mike and I have begun devising a plan to regain our independence. We've started saving every penny we can, cutting back on unnecessary expenses and focusing on building a future for our family. We've also discussed the possibility of moving out of state, seeking a fresh start away from Richard's influence. It's a daunting prospect, but the idea of a new beginning is both exciting and liberating. We want to build a home where our children can thrive, free from the shadow of narcissism. As we navigate this challenging journey, I hope that things will get better. I'm determined to create a loving and supportive environment for my family, no matter what it takes. The road ahead is uncertain, but I believe that with determination and resilience, we can overcome the obstacles in our path. In the meantime, I'm reaching out to you for advice and support. If you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear your stories and any wisdom you can offer. Together, I believe we can find a way through this and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for taking the time to listening my story and for any guidance you can provide. Your support means the world to me.